Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisres, Perek Daled, Halacha Daled. We're learning today Daf Lamed Zayin. We will begin on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph by the two dots, 3 lines from the top of the Amid, Rabbi Lezer Omer Hasheves, and we're going to systematically go through the entire Mishnah. And God willing, we will finish the 4th chapter today, Omeka Hadron, which means tomorrow we'll start the final, which is the 5th chapter of this Masechta. So the Mishnah said that Rabbi Eliezer, or in the Yerushalmi many times Rabbi Lezer, says that when it comes to Sheves, when it comes to Dil, and I'm quoting the words of Rabbi Eliezer, Mis Aseres, Zera, Yerek, Vizirim, the seeds and the greens, and by Sheves and the stems, as we explained, all of them have to be tithed, all of them have an objective definition of a peri, of fruit or a food. However, the Chachamim, they argue with Rabbi Eliezer and they say, Einoi misaser zera v'yerek, the only plant that without machshava, by default, you have to tithe both the seeds and the greens, that's only by shachalayim and garger, only by cress and garden rocket. We're going to begin today's share by explaining thoroughly Shitas Chachamim. It's not exactly as it sounds. We're going to have a Braisa that further clarifies this Chachamim that argue with Rabbi Eliezer. When we close up that topic, we're going to move on to the next topic in the Mishnah, which is Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel says that tomorrows, that the buds of Tilson and of Chardel and of full Halavan are, again, by default, Chayavos b'maiser, even when they were planted for their seeds. The tomatoes, as we explained, the buds are objectively considered significant. And again, the Gemara is going with the premise that the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Gamliel. The Gemara is going to explain exactly what is the opinion of the Chachamim. The next part of the Mishnah, which will be the final topic of today, and as we mentioned, it's also a topic that we learned about in the Masechta Brachas, B'negei Hilchos Brachas, which is the caper bush in English. In the Holy Tongue, it's called tzlaf. Now, tzlaf has tomatoes. Let's call them buds. And Kavan will have pictures if you need them. Tzlaf has evyoinois. Evyoinois are berries. And tzlaf has kafras or kafres, which are husks, which is a klipa, which actually more or less is connected to its berries. We'll actually see that unlike almost all klipa, the klipa goes around the peri. The husk that's connected to the berries, there's a part of the berry that goes around the husk. And that's actually going to be of significance. So Rabbi Eliezer says, again, when it comes to the tzlaf, very much like Rabbi Eliezer's shita in Sheves, which is the first topic of today. By the tzlaf also he holds that all misaseres, the tomatoes and the evyoinois and the kafres, they are all by default considered a peri. Rabbi Akiva is the one here that argues with Rabbi Lezer, and he says that einoi misaser ele evyoinois, only the evyoinois, we'll call them the berries, are by default considered a peri. I'll repeat this again, by default, meaning even l'shitas Rabbi Akiva, if someone who planted the tzlaf had a machshava, had an intention to harvest, to eat the other parts, even Rabbi Akiva will be moide that machshava moyeles. We're speaking about, we'll go through this every time by every one of these topics. The default, without machshava, that shita's machloikis between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Now, we're going to have to address a couple of things, and we're going to spend a lot of time today by the tzlaf. First of all, Orla. What's the status of Orla? Now, you should know this is connected. It should be connected one with the other. A peri is included in the dinei Orla, right? What has to be misaser? A peri. So let's speak about the husk, the klipa. Is the klipa, the kafres, included in Hilchos Orla or not? You would argue it's connected to this machlokes. We'll see it's not necessarily the case. It's not necessary, as we'll explain. Another topic concerning the tzlaf, which we just made mention, which is a topic that we learned already in Bavli Brachas. What is the bracha for the tzlaf? Now you have to ask for what part of the tzlaf. It's going to be amazing that there will be a possibility that for one part you'll make a ha'etz, for another part you'll make a hadama. We'll see how that works. That's going to lead us into the bigger question of whether the caper bush, is it a vegetable, halachically, or is it a tree? This is really a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says it has a din of a tree in brachas. However, even Beis Hillel will be moida, listen to these words, that when it comes to the halachas of maisres, lechumra only, we'll see what that means, we will also give it the status of a vegetable. As we mentioned yesterday, when we spoke about the legumes versus vegetables, that we spoke also a little bit about what is the determinant of its year, being that, number one, we don't give off trumos or maisres from produce from one year on the other. And even more, number two, that years 2 and 3 have a different type of meiser. Meiser sheni versus meiser ani. 3 and 4, right? 5 and 6. So what is the determinant by a fruit? We didn't mention yesterday. That's the chanata, the budding, not the hashrasha, not the gathering, but the chanata. Same thing. We're going to have to bring that back to the caper bush. Are we saying it's a tree only benegeya abracha? Also benegeya meiser, also benegeya the determinant, every detail. Then we have the same thing with kalayim. Chavra, don't forget, quickly go back to Masechtas Kalayim. It's amazing that trees are allowed, lechatchila, to be planted in a vineyard. Trees are allowed to be planted even in the Holy Land next to Zerayim. Kilei hakerem and kilei Zerayim don't apply to trees. How do we apply this benegeya the caper bush? It's all it's mamish all connected, but we'll see it's not all connected. That certain tanoim have the right to say that for this it's a tree, for that it's a vegetable. And finally, the last topic of today, we'll discuss how generally do you establish halachically whether something is a fruit, whether something is a vegetable. And let's speak about today. We live currently in Chutz La'aretz, just a hilchas brachas. Do you make a ha'etz? Do you make a adama? We're going to take a piece of Gemara over here. We're going to learn, God willing, a Tosfos and Masechta Brachas. We'll speak about Shitas Go'ainim, and that will really shed a lot of light, even though it's not so simple, but we'll try our best to find a certain mahalach, which is halachically very valid, like by berries, like what bracha do you make on berries? Just throwing it out, right? So generally, the rule is on berries, you make a ha'etz. Strawberries, you make a hadama. Why? And don't think that you have to replant a strawberry every year. You don't. You don't have to do that. So it is residual, but still you make a hadama. Why? We'll get to that, God willing, at the end of today's share. Okay, Daf Lamed Zayin, 3 lines from the top, by the brackets, by the 2 dots, Rabbi Lezer Oimer. So the Gemara over here is actually going to be focusing on Shitas Chachamim. The Rabbi Lezer is very clear. It sounds like the Chachamim are clear. The Chachamim say that when it comes to this dill, Einoi misaser zera v'yerek. By default, you're not going to give meiser from both the zera and the yerek, which l'choido. So what is shevis? So you would think that it's seed. It's not so pashut. We're going to clarify Chachamim. What the Chachamim say clearly is that the only 2 items, 2 plants, that without intent, both the seed and the greens are considered oichel or pedi, it's going to be shachalayim and garger. But what do they say benegei hashavas? Not clear, or there can be a misunderstanding. So says the Gemara, let me tell you Shitas Chachamim, and that is elaborated in a brayso. Tani, we learned the following: sheves. Listen, guys, if you planted it for the zera, so then, which is, I will say, that is its most significant part. Not only is it so objectively, according to the Chachamim, but so was your machshava, you planted the dill for its seed. Then indeed, only misaseres zera, and ve'enoi misaseres yerek, and I'll tell you, it goes without saying that enoi misaseres zidin, even though you don't have these words in the Braisa, it goes without saying. If you planted it for its greens. Now listen to these words. Even though, remember we learned yesterday, when you plant the coriander, the Mishnah says, when you plant the coriander for its greens, we don't say that only the greens are chayiv and the seed is spotted. We don't say that. No, it's the seed is considered objectively its most significant part. It's peta. When you plant it for greens, even if you only had in mind greens, your machshava was unable to nullify the chashivus of the zera. So when you plant it for the greens, same thing here by the dill, according to the Chachamim, misaseres both zera v'yerek. But the enoi misaseres zidin. which is, again, that's how the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds, I don't care what you had in mind, always dil is misaseres zera yerek v'zirin. However, even according to the Chachamim, guys, listen to this, zera l'zirin, this is a chiddush, this is something that we wouldn't have gotten on our own. If you planted for that which objectively is considered its most insignificant part, this is the theme. When I have in mind for the most objectively insignificant part, I cannot undo that which is more significant. It's like we make a kal v'chomer. If you, the planter, find even the zirin chashiv for you, so avada, you're going to find the green chashiv, and kol shchein v'kal v'chomer, then b'nai shel kal v'chomer, that you're going to find the seed. So even l'chachamim, when you have in mind one, it's not pshat that you will only be misaser that one. It depends what that one is. That's what the Braisa is adding. If I have a zara lizirin, even l'chachamim, then he'll agree with Rabbi Eliezer. Then misaseres zera v'yerek v'zirin. This is beautiful. No, it's the stems, the zirin are the least significant. When you have in mind something that's less significant, what you accomplish with that is that you upgraded the less significant, but you never downgrade the significant. The opposite. By you making something less significant, you are machshav that which is automatically more significant. So if you have in mind nothing, only the zera. If you have in mind the zera, only the zera. If you have in mind the yerek, yerek v'zera. If you have in mind the zirin, zirin, yerek v'zera. I love it. Asks the Gemara, hold on. Did we not learn in our Mishnah, according to the understanding of the Chachamim? Utaninan, did we not learn? We're just quoting the words of the Chachamim. Ein locha misaser zera v'yerek. Where do we find that you're misaser both the zera and the yerek? Ela shachalayim v'garger. So hold on, which sounds like the Chachamim are holding that by dil, you will never have to take off maisres from both the greens and the seed, right? Does it not sound that way? So the Gemara says, well, hold on. The Chachamim said that when you had no machshava. Answers the Gemara, Keina Masnisa, this is what the Mishnah is saying. Ein l'chodover shezroi lizera. If you had in mind seed, according to Rabbi Eliezer, what will be the din? When you plant dill and all you had in mind was the seed, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you have to give up maisres from the zera and from the yerek and even from the zirim. Here is where the Chachamim argue that when you have only in mind the seeds, we're never going to find in any plant that you'll be chayiv not only to take off maisres off the seeds, but also from the greens, only shachalayim v'garger bolvat. That is what the Chachamim are saying. Masha'en kain, if you plant the sheves and you have in mind its greens, even though you didn't have in mind its zera, then you are misaser both the zera and the yerek. So now we clarify the shita of the Chachamim, which is great. Now this type of logic, la Chachamim, is going to be used again soon. That even though we said yesterday, we're just elaborating the general rule that your machshav is very significant. Nevertheless, there are plants that when you have in mind that which is less significant, there are plants, not all of them. We don't say only what you had in mind became chashuv. Then we will say, your machshav, the less significant, then vadai, the more significant, also has to have maisres removed from it.
Rabbi, what makes shachalayim and gargle so special?
I have no idea. That's what Yakir. I don't know. No. The Chachamim actually, the Chachamim are saying this logic will apply to other things as well. What I just said. In other words, the Chachamim are not here to speak about Sheves. The Chachamim are really here to say that only shachalayim and garger, for whatever reason, the chashivus of the green is so great that if you have no machshava, you're going to have to give off both. If you have in mind the zera l'chachamim, by shachalayim, you'll have to also give from the greens, because the Torah looks at shachalayim and garger, not that the main is the seed, no, equal, green and the seed. Okay. I thank you, Kevin. Just to know, Stam, it's good. It's good that we are able to see what we're looking about. It's definitely an advantage. You know, when Hashem taught Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah on Har Sinai, that's what it says clearly. That's what Hashem did to him. He partially showed him. It was a hands-on teaching. And when Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Yidden, he also showed him. Okay. Says the next case in the Mishnah. Next case in the Mishnah is speaking about tomorrows we interpret it to be buds. And these types of buds, they ultimately, if you would not have harvested them, they would have developed, and ultimately in the tomatoes there would have been seeds. And most people would want for them to develop into seeds, and then for them to be harvested, and then they would take the seeds. In most cases, they would grind them, and they would have what they want to have from these items. The three items that we are talking about here is tilson, fenugreek, chardel is mustard, and pul halavan is a white bean, or you can just say a bean. So again, Rabbi Gamliel holds that the tomatoes of these three items of tilson, chardel, and pul halavan, the chachamim hold, are chayav b'maiser, even though, this is the chiddush, guys, listen to my words, even though you planted them only for the seeds. So you would think you harvested it way earlier. Doesn't matter. They have an objective chashivus that's not undone with your intent. Now, the chachamim did not say anything on Rabbi Gamliel, but the fact that this is only shitas Rabbi Gamliel, we have to clarify, and what did the chachamim say? Rabbi Gamliel, etc. Sounds like the chachamim are saying, I'll tell you right away, that if I planted tilson without machshava, or let me tell you better, if I planted tilson with a machshava zera, I had in mind for its seed, then if I took off the tomatoes, even though I took off the tomatoes, when I planted it, I didn't have in mind the tomatoes, the chachamim will hold, they b'chlal don't have to be tithed. And es gesund to hate. Not only achilas are, achilas keva, they're not chayv and mais. So the question is, what is the case where they disagree? This clarifies the Gemara. They only disagree if the intention during planting is lezera, like we just spoke out. So really, the chiddush is Rabbi Gamliel. Even though you had in mind the zera, Rabbi Gamliel held that by these three, the Torah is machshiv, the tomatoes, and you can't undo that. The Chachamim say, no, the Torah wasn't machshiv the tomatoes. Only you have that power. If you didn't have in mind the tomatoes, only the zera is chai. However, see, we're making the Chachamim less argumentative. Aval im zeroi liyerek. If you planted it beyond the norm is for the seeds. You had in mind yerek, af rabbanan moida, that what? That the tomatoes, listen to me, that the tomatoes have to be tithed. Where do we get it from? But you didn't have in mind for the tomatoes. This is based on what the Gemara just taught us. There's a hemshech in the Gemara, the way I understand it. Now that we said that when we have plants that have three parts, that's basically what we're saying. And objectively, part A is the most significant. Part B is medium significance. Part C is the least significance. When I, the planter, have in mind the least significant, then we make azak kal v'chomer. If you are even planting it for the greens, then for sure you're going to give significance to the tomatoes. So that's a chiddush of the Gemara. We wouldn't get that when we read the Chachamim. No, it's weird that they argue with Rabbi Gamliel only when you had in mind the most significant, which is the seed. If you had in mind the tomatoes, avada, the tomatoes will have to be misaser. The chiddush of the Gemara is that if I didn't have in mind the tomatoes, I had in mind the greens. The tomatoes are more edible than the greens. That's what it must be by these plants. Okay. Now that's a big chiddush. The Gemara for that needs to bring a proof, or wants to bring a proof, or found a proof. The Tanei Chein, and so we learned in a Braisa that there was a place called Beis Naim, that Shemakim, that the minig nahagin beveis Naim, that what? That biyarkoi beheter. When it came to the greens of these three items, tilson and or chardel and all pol halavan, that biyarkoi beheter. And who says that? Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Only Rabbi Eliezer says biyarkoi beheter. So the Gemara says, Lo yamar elo divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Now, the question is why? Why is it only divrei Rabbi Eliezer? Why isn't it also not divrei Rabbi Gamliel? Rabbi Gamliel says that even the tomatoes have to be tithed. Right? If the tomatoes have to be tithed, then why is it only and not what? And greens don't have to be tithed. So why is it only Divrei Rabbi Eliezer? There must be, I'll tell you what it must be. It must be that Rabbi Eliezer is the only one that says that if you plant it for its greens, the greens are so insignificant by these three items, even if you planted it for its greens, it's nothing. Must be that was the case. If you got it, Danny, if you didn't plant it for its greens, why is it only Divrei Rabbi Eliezer that noihagu beyarkoi beheter? Everyone should be saying it's a heter. For you to have a brisa that says that by the Tilson and the others that the greens are exempt, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer must be speaking about a case that the planter planted it for its greens.
But they're significant to you.
So that's the chiddush of Rabbi Eliezer, that by these items the greens are so insignificant that you can't even be machshavit. We have the. So what's the raya? So first I'll tell you that the raya is that greens are the least significant. So if you had in mind greens, let's go back to this logic, the tomatoes are more chashuv. So I can argue now that if you planted it for its greens, and according not to Rabbi Eliezer, according to everyone else, the greens are chayiv to be ma'asert. So for sure the tomatoes have to be ma'asert. Beautiful. In fact, the Gemara will have a question on that. Tani, we learned in another brayso, hapul, v'hasi oiden, v'hatilson. Two out of the three. I know we did not speak about the so'oiden, but so what? We're speaking about pool. Let's say it's pool halovin. For sure, tilson, that's the Fenugreek. So the brayso says, batla daitoi. Since no one, here you go, Kavan, clearly, since mamish, almost no one plants them for the greens, and therefore, zaron chayev, v'yarkan pater. And now what are we saying over here? We're saying that imzeroi liyerek, what did we just say? That other than Rabbi Eliezer, everyone will hold. The yerek will be chayiv. And then we're adding, and for sure the tomatoes will be chayiv. So this brayso is not attributing it to anyone. This is not a divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So Muslims, you have no option. You have to say that this brayso is Rabbi Eliezer. That's the Talmud Zayin on the base. That Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah oit hi de Rabbi Eliezer must be. Okay.
Does it matter that very often when they bring these agricultural prices, they speak about a particular region? Like here, they just spoke about.
Okay, Vlad is making a very good observation over here. That the fact that they attributed this to a region, it must be that it depends on the time and the place. Part of the determinant of is it chashuv, is it not chashuv, is it a pedi or not a pedi? That's, I think it's imbued in here. It's not a halacha that will be always. It's up to the time and the place. Must be that way. Today, if they'll find a medicinal something from the greens, or they'll convince you it's good, even though they'll make a few dollars, it's going to change. To say batla daito, you have to know what's the common current practice. Very good. Okay. And now today's final topic. And that's going to really, like we mentioned in the intro, now we're going to go all over the place. We're going to go to the Dinei Arlo, we're going to go to Dinei Brachas, we're going to go to Dinei Tukilei Akerem, we're going to go to everything. Just Rab Shlomo also said yesterday, it's good to know that the little bushes that grow out of the Kaisel Hamaravi are tzlafs. Never knew that. They're caper bushes. So everyone here is familiar with it. You just don't know what's what. And the tzlaf has three parts. Right? The tzlaf has tomatoes, buds, evyoinois, berries, and connected to the berries is a klipa called a kafres. And again, as we'll see, normally a shell, a klipa goes around the pedi. By the tzlaf, there's some part of the berry that goes around the klipa. So it's an interesting phenomenon. And maybe, Kevin, you can find a picture from that. That's only words we have in the Gemara here. And that will be of significance. So here again, Rabbi Eliezer, again, is the one that says all three parts have to have tithing removed from it. By default, Rabbi Akiva says only the evyoinus. And we kept on saying, even Rabbi Akiva's moida, that if you planted it for the other parts, you will be machshavit. We just learned that. If anything, only by the tilson over there, batla daita. We never learned batla daita yet. But if you planted it stam, according to Rabbi Eliezer, by default, misaser tomorrows evyonos and kafres, and Rabbi Kiva Omer ena misaser el evyonos. Now, evyonos are berries. So there's buds, berries, and klipa. If you see pictures, it's going to help. Just the words don't mean anything. So now we're going to bring this to Arla. Now, there's a Mishnah Befedish. There's an explicit Mishnah Masechtas Arla that says that when Hashem prohibited us to consume the fruits from fruit trees in their first 3 halachic years, that prohibition is extended to the klipa, to the shells, to the peels of the fruits as well. That's a Mishnah Masechtas Arla. Okay, so now says the Gemara, Shmuel Amar, that kafras or kafres, however you pronounce it, asur mishum klipin, kafres is the klipa. It's the shell around the berry or under the berry. So you should know that when it comes to the dinim of Arla, when it comes to the laws of Arla, we apply it also to its shells. Now you would argue who needed Shmuel? It's a Mishnah. We're going to get to that in a moment. But that's what Shmuel is saying. And says the Gemara, and indeed V'tani came, that when it says in Parshas Kedoshim, Va'araltem orlosoi espirioi, so everyone wonders, right? Why does the Torah use the word arlo? Because we have the word arla, aviv, when it comes to the bris milah. Why are we calling the fruits arla? A klipa. Okay. The arla in the human body covers the member. So the arla is merames to the klipa that covers the peri. It's a good insight. That's the brais. Va'araltem arlosa yespirioi davar shuhu oirel espirioi. The word arla means a cover. That is also included. Okay. That was what the Braisa adds to the Mishnah is a source. But you would think that after you hear this, okay, like almost like pshita, and it has to be that way. Arla includes the klipa. Shmuel says, and so by the kafras. However, we'll see that other people were not noyig that way. So the Gemara says Rav mefaket li'ilein devei Rab Asi. This is very unusual that Rab Asi, which is normally spelled Aleph Samach Yud, is spelled over here Sof Yud. Whether it's another Amoida, whether it's a mistake, whether sometimes you can interchange, which maybe you could, the Samach and the Sof. Even though Be'emes, every letter has another pronunciation. We're not medagdik as of yet. But anyways, Rav instructed to the household members of Rav Asi and to the household members of Rav Huna. And for some reason, there's no Rav here. We spoke about it a few days ago. This digduk, you have to make sure you get it right. Hamnuna and Havamnuna. Oh, I'm sorry, take it back. Rav was mefake to the household members of Rav Asi. Rav Huna and Rav Hamnuna, both of these Amoraim, like Rav, were mefake. They instructed to the general chevre that what? That tevoin mefaktin l'neshechain, instruct your wives who are the ones working in the kitchen. Today you have many men over here that like doing in the kitchen. So kad, that's not a critique. That's good. Kad inun kafshin hadar kafriso. When you will pickle the caper bush, the Yehevin mirimin elain bitasa. Make sure to remove the berries. In other words, they're speaking about cases where it's still arla. So when you pickle it, they taka only wanted to have the klipa. Make sure to remove the berry because the berry is arla. So tell your wives, and because it looks like you can remove the berry, but epis of the berry remains stuck somewhere. Make sure to thoroughly remove the berry. But what are they all saying? That as long as you remove the berry, even though you're removing the berry because it's arla, but the husk, eskizum tehate. So first of all, that goes against Shmuel. It doesn't bother us if Rav argues with Shmuel. If Rav Huna and Rav Hamnuna argue with Shmuel, Amayroim. But for them to argue with Tatana, with a Mishnah, and now we have a Braisa with the source, that will be a problem. And now, Amar Rabbi Ba, that Asbiri Rab Ze'eda explained to me, what does he have to explain? How can they go against a Mishnah? Kol haklipin gedelois imapedi. Yeah, you're right. Va'araltem orlosoi the Torah uses the words arla, davar shu oira lespiri is included in arla. So why would it not? So I get Shmuel. Shmuel says it goes to the caper bush husk. But why would they argue? Because only klipos, which are defined, that which gedelis imaperi is interpreted different ways over here. We're going to teach it. Gedelis imaperi means it covers the entire fruit. It's a klipa. However, what's unique when it comes to the berry of the caper bush and to its kafras, the ze pri milmailon uklipin milmatan. Kevin, if you can find the picture, that would be great. Because really, it's not accurate when it comes to the entirety of. Actually, the pictures that he's showing, the klipa looks, the kafras looks to be covering everything. Here there is the upper part. The upper part of the berry is exposed, even with the klipa. Maybe it's by default opened. I don't know if the Kevin is showing pictures. It looks like it doesn't. It's opened already. You can look at the Zoom. If not, you can Google it yourself. Or maybe that happened afterwards. Here we're saying that the kafras doesn't cover the entire berry. Actually, the upper part of the berry is over the kafras, which will explain why you can argue, which is taka machlokes hamayroim, whether the Mishnah and the Braisa include the kafras or not. Okay. Says the Gemara, and this will be a backup to Shitas Rabbi Eliezer that says tzlaf misaser tamarois evyonis and kafres. Let's go more into it. This is behemshich to also what we learned yesterday. When I take off maisres, I'm not allowed to take off maisres from one species on another species. I have to take it off min al minoi from the same year, etc. Now, how do we view the kafres and the tamaris? So he's saying the kafres, the klipa, it's amazing, and the tamaris, not the berry, and the buds, says the Braisa. Or says the Gemara. Says the Gemara, they are considered min echad. What does it mean they're min echad? This is amazing. That ma'aser mikafres ala tamaros umin atmaros ala kafres. You got that, Aviv? So I got to take off 2% truma gedola. I'm allowed to take off 2% from the kafras for the kafras and the tamaros. Like we learned yesterday, the same thing over here. We consider them to be the same. But not the berries. Avoloi mehen alu avyonos, nor min avyonos alehem. In other words, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, that says that all of these three are subject to tithing, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Nevertheless, the berries are considered to be a different species. The berries are considered to be now. Why are they a different species? Now we're going to dive right into Ilchis Brachos. So look inside the Rasharili on the right column, 6 lines before the bottom. Hakafres vatamaris min echad. Look at this. Va'akulu mivarchen. What bracha do you make on that? Bayre Pri Adama. Why do we make a Bayre Pri Adama? Because the Yere came. However, avoloi mehen alo avyonis, or the other way around, because the avyonis have a payday ho'ilan. And guys, this is a machlokes Rabbi Shammai and Beis Hillel. If you remember, we paskin like Beis Hillel. This is Beis Hillel. Only for the avyonis you make a Bayre Pri Ha'etz. So if you make two different brachas, izaraya, it's considered two different species. So it doesn't contradict one thing and the other, because I have to be ma'aser, both payday and vegetable. I know that according to some Rishonim, all payday will be d'oraisa. Vegetables that are abundant, doesn't matter. I have to, maisres is one area of halacha. But when it comes to which one on the other, and where do we see that? By brachas, that will be consequential also for hilchas maisres. Since we make different brachas on these parts, that which is ha'etz cannot be used to be toinem on the hadama. That which is hadama cannot be used to be the trumos or maisres for the ha'etz. This is great. And again, this is a braisa. This is a braisa. Now the braisa continues. Aviyoina is the berries. So we just said berries are Bayre Pri Ha'etz. Okay. No, there's another thing. Even when it comes to the berries, noisnin aleim chumrei ilan v'chumrei zeroim. It's not full-fledged ha'etz, fruit. We also have to put the chumrah. Now, what would that mean? So look at the words in the Yerushalmi. Velaida mila. I don't know exact meaning of that. Velaida mila means for what? For what halacha are you referring to? What do you mean to put the chumras? We already said, okay, we got it. The Evyonos is considered separate. We already said we're going with Beis Hillel. You can't make two brachas on it. You're making a boire pri ha'etz. So where are we saying that the Evyonos have to have chumras for what? For what halacha? So now, if for the halacha of the determinant of the year, so let's go, guys. If it would be viewed as just a boire pri ha'etz, just a boire pri ha'etz, when it comes to fruit, how do we determine its year? Chanata. By Elon, we follow the Chanata. Don't forget that Beis Shammai holds that all of it is a boire pri adama. Now, by brachas, we can't be machman on both ways. But when it comes to the determinant, is it from the second year, or is it from the third year, or is it from the third year or fourth? That's where we care, because if it's from the second year, Meiser Sheni. If it's from the third, Meiser Ani. So here we say, She'im Hoisa Shniya. If it, on one hand, it belongs to the second year. On the other hand, it entered the third year. Or let me use these words. The berries themselves had the chanata way earlier, on the second year. By fruits, basar chanata. By vegetables, basar likitoi isuroi. You harvested the berries on the third year. So don't say, okay, you make a boire pri ha'etz, which we do. We can't take from the evyonos on the tomorrows, emes. Okay, so basar chanata, for that not. Even here will be machmer. We're going to give credence to say, no, maybe we determine its year like vegetables. But now what do I do? Now we're not saying only vegetables, both. So, which I now know what, in other words, either I have to be machbar, I have to both take off Meiser Sheni and take off Meiser Ani. So when a person hears that, they can make a mistake. They can think, okay, take off Truma, take off Meiser Rishon, take off Meiser Sheni, and then take off Meiser Ani. You don't do that. You don't do that. Because since Meiser Sheni has an option for you to redeem it, take off Meiser Sheni, 10% from that which remained after the Truma Meiser Rishon. Remember, like if you began with 100, Meiser Sheni will be 8.8. Okay. After you designate this as Meiser Sheni, redeem it. And that 8.8 give to an Ani. And then you say Miman Avshach. If it was really Meiser Ani, Meiser Ani. If it's Meiser Sheni, okay, I redeemed it. And now I gave an act of kindness. I gave a poor man some food. And regardless, the money has to be taken to Yerushalmi and then redeemed on Oichel. That's Shumafresh.
Wait, but when you give it to the Ani, you have to let the Ani know that he has to spend it on Oichel in Yerushalayim, right?
No, you don't. Because before I gave it to the Ani, Upoidehu, if it would only be the second year, Danny, if I separate the 8.8 for Meiser Sheni, and now I redeem it, the only chiyuv here is to take the money to take it to Yerushalayim. The fruit is chulin. If I want to give a poor man food, I'm doing a mitzvah of tzedakah. It's not meiser, but I'm giving him a food. Beautiful. So upoideyu, and it itself the nois neila ani. So now we have a chumrah that for one din, for the determinant, even Beis Hillel doesn't say stam ha'etz. No, you make a boire pri ha'etz, but you have to put on it the chumrah of a vegetable. And now let's move on to kalayim. And let's remember, Chevra, there is no kilei hakerem, there is no kilei zeroim by trees. There is a big problem. Kilei zeroim ba'aretz, kilei hakerem bein ba'aretz midairaisa, bein b'chutz la'aretz midrabanan, to plant vegetables in a vineyard. Can I plant a tzlaf in a vineyard? Right, so you're going to say, according to Beis Hillel, again, boire pri ha'etz, you could, hold on. So says the Gemara, according to Braisa, Hatzlaf, Beis Shammai is the one that says that even on the Evyonos you make a boire pri adama. So according to Beis Shammai, it's considered a vegetable. If it's considered a vegetable, then kalayim bekerem. All right, that's easy. That's easy. But the einam kalayim bezroim, which is amazing. Now people are wondering, how can that even be? It's a boire pri adama. So for those of us who learned Masechtas Kalayim, we said something that's unique to Kalayim. Normally, Marasayin is a rabbinic issue that we limit to only where Chazal said it. Just a review. By Kalayim, the concept of Maras Ayin is a biblical issue. What's really usher by kalayim is the appearance of something being mixed. Since the caper bush appears like a tree, there is no appearance of any mixture because it looks like a tree, even according to Beis Shammai that says you make a bayit pri adam on all of its parts. Amazing. Look at the leniency. However, Beis Hillel, einoi kalayim loy bekerem v'loy bezroyim. Since it's considered a tree, the main part, what did Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva says that einam esaser el avyonos. In other words, the main part is the avyonos, the berries. On the berries, you make a bayit pri ha'etz. Even though we were machmir when it comes to the determinant to go chumras, but when it comes to kalayim, we're not machmir. Beis Hillel allows you to plant it in a kerem and in a zerayim patch because it's considered a bona fide tree. A tree you can plant lachatchila in a kerem, and a tree you can plant near vegetables, even in the Holy Land. Don't forget, b'chutz la'aretz, you can make a vegetable. Many people have vegetable patches. No one is concerned about kilos. You cannot plant in a kerem grain, legumes, and vegetables. Okay.
That's why going back to parts of this caper bush, we're making it considered a vegetable, yet outside of Shmuel, we're considering it to be, we do say arla plants.
I just said we're going according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says that the only part of the caper bush that's by default significant are the berries, and for the berries you make ha'etz. So the berries are for sure arla. The Mishnah says that midoiraisa, you include the klipa, it doesn't apply to the kafres. Shmuel says it does. And the other, the Rav and Rav Ahuna, Rav Amnuna, they argue. Okay, let's finish. Now, how do you determine whether something is a tree and a vegetable? So here we go. This is it. Tani Rabbi Chinana bar Papa. Guys, this is such an insightful piece of Gemara. We're going to stand with what we kept on repeating, that if what you planted has residual, it's considered a ha'etz. If what you planted is a one-off, it's considered a hadama. Not so simple. That is a good premise, but there's a lot more to that. And this when we put this into the equation, we're going to have great understanding. That which grows, whether that are the fruits themselves, whether we're talking about the branches, listen, whether we're talking about the leaves, that which grows out of its trunk, that which grows out of a part of the tree that's above the surface. Not only is it that it's residual, but it's the beginning is growing from above the ground. That's how you determine this is min ilan, for which you make a bayit pri ha'etz. But if what's growing, I'm talking about either the fruit or the branches or the leaves, that which is growing migizoi amishirashav, which means from any part of the tree that's under the ground, from any part of the tree that's beneath the surface, it doesn't have to be from the roots. That will have a classification of a yadak. Now, I want to add something. There are trees, this is the key. The Go'anim said it on this Gemara, that physically, it's growing from the part that's above the surface. But on winter, everything above the surface withers. Even though you don't have to replant it, because in the spring, chayzer v'neyar, it regenerates, but the regeneration is only from the part that's under the surface. Listen to these words. Based on this statement, something that grows from under the surface is called a yerek. Then I'm going to tell you, strawberries, that even if it's physically growing from a part of the bush that's above the surface, even though you don't have to replant it every year, but since in winter, everything above the surface is kaput. The only thing that survives the winter is that which is under the surface. That regenerates everything. So since the residual is under the ground, we will consider everything to be coming from under the ground. That piece of information explains everything.
Wait, growing
And that's why on a strawberry we make a bayit pri adama. and all other berries you make it. We're going to read a Tosfos. Tosfos says this in Brachas. Let me finish. I asked Gemara, it's not true. I'll tell you it's not true. One example will be kruv. Kruv grows from parts that are above the surface. Cabbage you make al adama. The answer the Gemara gives is, what are you talking about? Cabbage is a one-off. Cabbage is a one-off. That's a given. Something that you plant and you grow once, you want another one, plant again. That's vaday boire pri adama. So there we don't go into above the ground or below the ground. Answers the Gemara, no kan bevadai. Cabbage is vaday boire pri adama. Everyone knows if you plant something and it only grows once and you harvest it, you want it again, plant it again. That's for sure boire pri adama. I don't care where it comes from. The question is there something that you plant once and it gives you residual, and still you're going to have a boire pri adama? So, that was the chiddush. The vort is because it's coming from that which is under the surface. And then the goinim add this thing that I said. Even if it's physically coming from the part above the surface, if that part withers, if that part is not residual, even though this thing survives, but it only survives from the roots. Let me read it inside. Khan, where does Rabbi Chanana bar Papa give us chiddush? By a suffix. What will be the suffix? Like I mentioned, it's residual. So why would you make a boire pri adama if you don't have to plant it every time? And on that we say hadran Allah al kovish hashoylek. And just to read, I know it's late in Daf Mem. This is Brachas Bavli Daf Mem in the last Tosfos on Amud Aleph. Mahachanira the tusim berries v'chayoytze behem tzirichem levarach aleim boire pri. In derech ha'etz liskaim yomim rabim, meaning the chishakel hapedi bishana zu chader asi pede ba'oisa ha'etz atzmai next year. In other words, the residual is not something the Gemara mentions. It was so vadai, the Gemara doesn't even say vadai. How is it vadai? That was known. What we are adding is that even if the tree survives from year to year, if that which grows is coming from under the ground, and then you have to add what I said from the Go'inim, it's still going to be a boire pri adama. I want you to know, guys, bananas, the branch from which bananas grow, no residual. That branch only gives once. So it's coming from above the ground. Since it's no residual, it's a vaday boire pri adama. We'll stop there.
I don't know if it's helpful, but there are several other characteristics that they use today. Like I think there's 6 characteristics. One of them, by the way, has to do with how close it is to the ground.
How close to the ground, and whether it looks like
the Gabi is saying the ground anyhow is going to be a hadama. Nice. And then if there's a hollow trunk is another one, and whatever. Smichas chaver.